This is Ron Frenz, comics illustrator, and this is a bumper for the Amazing Spider Talk.
Hello and welcome to the Amazing Spider Talk. My name is Dan Gvozden and I'm the founder and editor of SuperiorSpiderTalk.com.
Hiya, Dan.
Hi.
I'm Mark Ginocchio.
What are you doing here?
Well, I'm the founder of Chasing Amazing. That's a cool blog that doesn't really exist anymore, but you can still find it. And I'm currently an editor at SuperiorSpiderTalk.com.
What, you come here often?
Yeah, you know. What are we talking about today, Dan?
Just every week or so. Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for joining us here at this, I guess it seems kind of like a weird watering hole of podcast hosts, meetups. But yeah, we're doing a special Essentials episode of Amazing Spider Talk. And we hope you enjoyed this podcast and that it provides an intelligent conversation between two fans and collectors as we look at the Spider-Man comic universe in a bit of a bigger picture.
See, what people didn't realize was when we were doing the B-Book reviews, the old format was kind of a version of speed dating.
Oh,
where like every minute, ding, switch tables. Now let's talk about Spider-Woman. Ding.
We're a match made in heaven here, Mark.
You bet. Well, anyway, for this episode, when we're not talking about speed dating, we'll be discussing a potential essential Spider-Man comic, and it's my pick, so you're going to like it. That pick is Homecoming, not the movie, but the comic book. That's Amazing Spider-Man number 252 by Tom DeFalco, Roger Stern, and Ron Frenz. Then we got a couple of Spider News items, and I think that's about it.
Awesome. You know, Mark, I'm a little worried that after this upcoming musical break, we're going to come back in completely different outfits. Do you think our listeners will know or care?
No.
With great power, with also comes great responsibility. Don't grow more by trying to kill yourself with your ability. We're not talking about extra comics, we're just talking about classic comics today.
Mark, it's nice to see you back, this time wearing all black.
Yes.
Fitting for our discussion of Amazing Spider-Man 252. Which,
It's very slimming.
It's very slimming. That too. Mark, it's almost like you've lost a lot of weight recently.
Yes, you know, that's what happens when you go to other planets. You know, you can't eat the food. That's, you know, so
don't drink
the weight
the
just
water
goes.
on Beyonder World or whatever.
No, it just makes everything go right through you, if you catch my drift.
Yeah, all right. Well, so Amazing Spider-Man 252, also known as Homecoming. This is your essential pick. We're coming towards the end of these essentials, but they're all equally valuable. Why did you put this one on your list? Do tell.
Well, you know, it's funny. And initially, I actually wanted to talk about like the entire Alien Suit saga, which would have been like this issue, and then the following 6 or 7 up to 258. That issue that we had Ron Frenz on to talk about many moons ago. But I kind of just settled on doing 252, both for brevity's sake and because I think from a very self-contained standpoint, this issue says everything you kind of need to say about this new era of Spider-Man. I mean, in terms of history, this is an important comic. It's the first appearance of the symbiote, the black suit, which is, you know, probably one of the most dramatic status quo shifts in Spider-Man history. Yeah, it's just a costume, but I mean, when you think about everything that came from that costume that followed, I mean, it's hard to undersell the importance of putting Spider-Man in a black costume ended up being. Beyond that, this also ties in intricately to Marvel's first really big event, which was Secret Wars. We're in an event-driven industry now, but at the time, these kind of events were, one a year most, and it was kind of a big experiment for Marvel to do something where a line-wide comic book series would have impacts on each individual series. For Spider-Man, it was he came back with this new costume, but kind of in a quirky little marketing technique. The issue of Secret Wars where he obtains the costume actually had not come out at the point where he shows up in 252 with the new costume. So it kind of begs the question to the reader, like, oh, you got to go read this other series to find out how he got these new threads, which was pretty clever. So that to me puts it in the essential. And then, in terms of the content, I referred to this a few minutes ago about kind of maybe doing this whole run of issues by DeFalco and Frenz. And I settled on this one because it really is with Roger Stern still provided the general plot for this, and his contributions are important because as kind of my research for things showed, Stern was basically one of the ringleaders behind making the suit alive. That was kind of one of his last parting shots before leaving Spider-Man for good. But with that said, there's an approach to this comic. All the way from the fact that the cover is an homage to Amazing Fantasy 15, where it just everything about it kind of has this. It's a new era of Spider-Man, and it's also kind of funny because Frenz would leave for the next two issues for Rick Leonardi and then come back and then have a sustained run with Tom DeFalco, because I don't think Ron Frenz was initially supposed to be the every month artist. So I guess there was kind of a push for him to be that person. But even with that said, the two of them together just kind of set out to kind of craft this love letter to all things Spider-Man, and I'll go into finer detail, but in terms of the supporting cast in New York City and his powers and his and all the things that make Spider-Man, it kind of serves of what, if this was done in the modern era, this would probably be like a volume 2 or a volume 3 issue 1. It's a major jumping on point for new readers. It's very self-contained. It's got that every comic is somebody's first comic feel to it, and I think that in tandem with these historical tidbits make this an essential pick.
It's a good pick, and I don't know how I feel about it in regards to the word essential, but I do think the one thing that really stands out to me about this issue is that it would be the first time that Spider-Man changes costumes. And I think that has kind of become, thanks to the success of the black suit, a key part of the character. And I think almost to the point of being abused today, or in Slott's early run, where it was every other issue we got a new suit. I don't know that I agree with you that it's that big of a reboot. That might justify number one. It actually, I think, is a really great example of how things used to be done in Marvel Comics, where new creators wouldn't necessarily rock the boat with their debut. They weren't looking to make quote make their mark, on the character, rather than kind of just extend the logical narrative and continue the legacy of the character. So I think in that way, it's actually a very refreshing handover of the reins of the character to someone new. I think if people weren't looking super closely, the Tom DeFalco and Roger Stern eras on the book, could almost blend together. And I think for me as a young person, kind of did, because it kind of seamlessly transitions from one to the other.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but I do think there are some pretty conscious breaks from the older narrative. With the Stern and Romita Jr. run that preceded this, obviously the Hobgoblin was a huge focus of it. There was the Black Cat romance, which kind of figured into it, although that was written about more specifically in Spectacular. I mean, it still was addressed during Stern's run. And you know, I think here between, you know, the costume coming in and look, I say what you will about it being abused and whatever, but like, I mean, you got to remember when this was done, it was considered very dramatic for a superhero not named Wolverine, who probably would get a new costume every week, it seemed like, to get a makeover like this. I mean, this was very dramatic. It was a huge risk. I mean, we've talked to Tom DeFalco about kind of the fear that the fans were going to hate this when it came out, so much so that they went forward with it and then planned to scrap it within like an issue before being kind of forced by Secret Wars itself to carry it out for about 6 or 7 issues.
I think if they weren't asked to scrap it, it probably wouldn't have become the Venom suit that we know today.
Right. Which is, you know, obviously a key point. But like I was saying, I mean, with the suit and some of the storylines that were kind of being introduced and others that were kind of being put to bed, I think officially, this really does feel like even though it's a smooth transition from Stern to DeFalco, it's not like someone came in and said, I'm going to write Spider-Man an entirely new way. I mean, I when reading these issues, I get a very definitive sense of, okay, we're doing something different now. You know, we're not, you know, like we wouldn't start talking about Hobgoblin again until, you know, another 10 issues or so. You know what I mean? And like, you know, there's stuff right away with Black Cat where you're like, you know, oh, we're gonna need to talk about her. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not, you know, because there's some crap going on with her that I'm not a fan of. I mean, like, it's like they're sowing the seeds for that disintegration. And I mean, there's even that scene very early on with Jonah and Robbie, and you know, like one of the last issues of the Stern run was Jonah resigning as editor, but staying on as publisher of the Bugle for his role in the Scorpion creation being outed by the Hobgoblin during his little extortion thing, and you know, Jonah's trying to press Robbie to change the cover of the newspaper with all the heroes missing about, you know, what's Spider-Man's role, and Robbie's like, my paper now. I'm not, you know, if you want to do what you do with Spider-Man, do it on your page.
Yeah.
And like I said, it was just like very subtle messaging to me that indicate like this comic is going in a new direction. And as history would prove, it was a really interesting direction. So I don't know. That's why I kind of hang my hat on this idea of it being a bit of a soft reboot.
Yeah, I feel that. I guess I don't think that the story in this issue is, I mean, it's not a complete story. It's really, I mean, this issue is primarily, like you said, these are the new seeds, and this is the black suit in all of its glory and weirdness. And there is some weird stuff here, like Peter putting his keys into his crotch. I don't know how you feel about that.
Well, you know, it's a fanny pack.
Yeah, right. It's the super alien fanny pack from the Beyonders Secret Wars. But yeah, I mean, really, that's the thing to talk about is the black suit and the striking design and all of that stuff. And yeah, maybe the boldness of that suit is enough to put it in Essentials territory. Right,
and I mean, the boldness of the suit, but and also what the suit came to be. I mean, you know what I mean? Like obviously, without the suit, you don't have Venom. Without Venom, you don't have Carnage, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, like this is a comic and a storyline that gets called back upon with regularity. I mean, you know, there was, albeit a poorly received movie, a Spider-Man movie based on this comic. You know,
That's true.
There have been cartoon series based on this comic. You know what I mean? Like the black suit is, you know, it's spoiler alert, in the Spider-Man 100 Things book that I'm writing, the Black Suit Saga gets its own chapter because it's really, to me, it's a really important era and a really important turning point for the character and the story and the narrative.
Cool.
Sorry.
And one of the things that I took away from this, and maybe it's just because we aren't seeing it in Spider-Man comics these days, and I have my own theories about why, is that like New York is a big character in this issue. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, that's for certain. I mean, like, you know, we get some stuff early on in this comic where, you know, in addition to New York being a character, I mean, we get a check-in on like the entire supporting cast, like right up front, which was really great. And that was kind of commonplace for Amazing Spider-Man during this era. But like, you know, we're checking in with May and Nathan Lebetsky and Black Cat and Jonah and Robbie and yada, yada, yada. But then New York itself, and there's this really kind of, you know, there's this focus going on throughout the entire story about these weird, unbelievable things that Peter had witnessed while on the Battle World, fighting Secret Wars. And I also always appreciated how the way DeFalco and Frenz address it in this comic, you know, address the storyline that actually has not been written yet, which is to be like, it's so unbelievable no one will ever see this. like he destroys the film from his camera. I mean, it's like, it's just so like, no, like what are you doing? There's this great, you know, and kind of like as an interlude to all that, you know, we're getting back into the setting. Well, it's not even getting back, but Peter is getting back into the setting of his home, his place, and, you know, New York in the 80s, which is, I mean, even more than New York was earlier in Spider-Man. I mean, New York in the 80s specifically was such a unique character. And, you know, by the end, it meets up with these two. I mean, he refers to them as kids, but I would say they're probably they're teenagers or maybe like in their 20s. I mean, they're not young.
I would say they're like probably like late teens.
Yeah. And they're like, you know, basically they're down on their luck. They're, I guess they're working class. Maybe they're annoyed about NAFTA. I don't know. Taking all the steel mill jobs out of the city. But point being, they're kind of dissing on New York and their home and like, you know, what's so great about this place. And Spidey kind of picks them up and goes web slinging with them. And, you know, it kind of makes them see the city from a new perspective. And it just then also Peter kind of talks about how it reaffirms his own beliefs and love for New York. And it's you know, we have those love letter issues to New York in Spider-Man history, like obviously the World Trade Center issue and Spider Island, the way that ended, I felt was kind of a love letter to New York. But like, this is in its own way, kind of less on the nose and a little more artful, I feel. And I really, as a New Yorker, appreciate kind of that it's not, you know, we're not looking at like big, beautiful buildings lit up or kind of absorbing the tragedy and watching people of the city come together. It's more like, yeah, these are just a couple of street urchins, for lack of a better word, and we're just taking in kind of the grim and the grit. You know, there's something that Frank Miller kind of exploited as like the seedy underbelly of urban America, and just showing an affection and a gentleness to it, and I really, really like that.
I wonder if that's why New York doesn't really play a prominent role in Spider-Man comics, or even like Marvel comics in general anymore. I mean, yes, most stuff is set there, but there is this kind of lack of affection for the city, and I wonder if it's because New York has kind of become so sanitized since the 80s. It doesn't have that kind of. You can't go to Manhattan and imagine a seedy underbelly, of villains there, other than maybe going down to Wall Street.
It's funny.
Yeah.
I was to say, a couple of years ago, I was at New York Comic Con, and I attended a panel. It was during Marvel's 75th anniversary celebration, and it was a street level heroes panel. So it was talking Spider-Man and Daredevil, and basically the creators that we talk about all the time were there. It was DeFalco, it was Rick Leonardi, it was J.M. DeMatteis, Ann Nesenti was there talking about like her Daredevil run, and Ann actually Nesenti at one point referenced how like when she would go into like Marvel's bullpen, the offices, like she like got mugged a couple of times. I mean, you know what I mean? Like, and that kind of informed her writing about Hell's Kitchen in New York, and when she was writing Daredevil.
Yeah, now Hell's Kitchen is like the best, food
right.
in the city, and
right.
Yeah,
and I asked the question, and I was a little disappointed because I don't feel like any of the creators on the panel really addressed it. Where I was like, you guys kind of dealt with version of Frank Miller's New York when you were living there and writing these comics, and like it's part of the reason why the street level isn't as emphasized anymore in favor of these like fantastical cosmic stories, is because the real street level isn't as interesting anymore. What are we going to be writing about, like Bloomberg's smoking ban or soda bans or something? You know what I mean?
A superhero can't get a 20-ounce gulp in the city anymore.
Right. I mean, it's just like it's. I mean, where I live in Brooklyn, I have Industry City near me, and Industry City is like, there's a chocolatier, and
right.
and the Brooklyn Nets practice facility with open, beautiful glass window facade looking out over the river to the skyline of Lower Manhattan is there, and there's no industry.
Mole Man's not going to attack anymore. He's too busy, walking around the street smoking pot in the East Village, and getting one of his mole creatures a portrait in a dog portrait, studio.
The Doctor Strange's Sanctorum. I mean, what's it's like now a Starbucks, I think, right? I mean,
I thought you were going to say it's an artisanal cheese shop.
Probably artisanal pickles.
I do like Murray's on Bleecker Street. That's the artisanal cheese shop to go to.
But Murray's is also an institution. I mean,
that's true.
I was to say, like, if you like, that's why I would say, like, artisanal pickles, I think is probably the better. That's a very Brooklyn thing.
Have you ever been to those cheese caves that are under the street?
Oh yeah, they're so good. No,
you got to put on these weird like doctor's garments to go down there because you don't want to contaminate the cheese.
Anyway, point being, I do think that that certainly plays a role. What you were talking about in terms of the experience of New York is just not what it once was. I mean, we got a lot of it post 9/11, I think, because obviously 9/11 was 9/11, and that was so overwhelming in scope and feeling that it just was it kind of easily informed what people thought about New York and the country. But also, I mean, you got to also wonder with kind of the age of comics and stuff like that, age of technology and whatnot. Not that it's a prerequisite to live where you work, but I mean, I think you got less people who write Marvel Comics living in the city now.
Yeah.
I mean, Dan Slott lives in the city. I mean, we could say what we want, and I do think Dan Slott probably works in, at least he used to work in New York a lot more than others do.
Yeah, a little bit. A little bit. I can't think, other than, Spider Island, there's been a couple of spreads that he's done that are very New York,
Yeah.
but it's not on the level of like Mark Waid writing New York.
That's fair.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's like you got a bunch of younger kids living in the South or living on the West Coast or something, and they can do that. But I mean, there are probably some people who've just never set foot in the city writing about it now. I mean, and how is that going to inform you? It won't. It just won't. Like you have to live in New York to feel what New York is. I mean,
They're not going to make a Murray's cheese reference.
No, definitely not. They're not going to know that. They can make the GW Bridge Brooklyn Bridge joke and not actually know where the GW Bridge is vis-a-vis the Brooklyn Bridge. You know what I mean?
The minute they make an Essa-bagel reference will be the minute I die.
We'll work on that. But I mean, you were in New York for how many years, Dan? I mean,
5.5, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and 5.5, and say what you will about New York versus LA where you are now or whatever, but like you know what I'm talking about in terms of just feeling what it's about. I mean, and you were during a better transition period, right? I mean, like you weren't in for the dark days.
No, but I wasn't there for like the skyline and all of that craziness.
Right. But the point being is yeah, there's definitely a gum under your shoe feel to this city, but it's kind of like, yeah, but it's my gum and it's my shoe and I'm happy to be stuck in it, kind of a thing. You know what I mean? Like,
That reminds me of like this great Onion article where it was like thousands or like everybody flees New York after realizing it's a hellhole, and like quote Woody Allen from the helicopter leaving the city. I don't know what I ever saw in that place.
yeah.
Yeah, you gotta love the gum on your shoe. That's a good way of putting it. Yeah.
Yeah. Just before we totally transition out of this, I did want to talk a little bit about, we talk about the suit and whatnot, and I really want to give credit to Ron Frenz and just how he rendered the really creepy, mysterious elements of the costume in this. Like, to me, it really helped bait the curiosity of what is this thing. I mean, did you have any specific thoughts to what he put forward art-wise in terms of the costume here?
Well, I always find it interesting to watch kind of the evolution of how artists handle, Venom as like an organic creature. I mean, Ron Frenz, it's kind of, he does a lot of like hatching, like there's like these like, parallel lines and stuff as it creeps up his body. It's not as organic as it eventually like became during like, say, issue 375, the Mark Bagley, where it's like tendrils, like wrapping around the face and stuff like that. But there is a creepiness to it here. I love that when he thinks about his camera, it pops out of his suit. As bizarre as that is, where it's like, oh, I forgot this giant bulking camera was attached to my hip. But yeah, I mean, there's some interesting stuff here. You had a particularly interesting note in our notes here that I didn't even notice until you pointed it out.
Yeah, I mean, there's one scene when Peter's back in his apartment and he kind of unintentionally summons the costume, and the text from DeFalco actually describes it as a snake slithering across the floor to meet its host, or so to speak. And when you actually look at the visual, it doesn't look like a snake as much as it looks like a shark. It kind of has like a tail and a fin kind of protruding from it, and I just thought, like, maybe this is a bit of an overread on my part, but I thought, given what the costume turned out to be, I mean, it was a predator. I found the fact that it looked like a shark to be a more fitting analogy in terms of the symbolism of what was happening. I mean, a snake, generally with snakes, it's kind of like, they don't harm you unless you intimidate them, kind of a thing. Whereas a shark is considered more aggressive, more stalks. It's like if there's blood in the water, it will attack, kind of a thing. So I just felt like that was kind of a better visualization of it. I just really, anytime I see that panel and I see like the text refer to it as a snake, but see what Frenz actually put forward, I like what Frenz did better than what the text indicates. Like I think it's more assertive, for lack of a better word.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's part of the reason I love, kind of being a bit of a Spider-Man historian is I think the creation of the character of Venom is such an interesting, like, retcon. It, like, recontextualizes all that you saw before, which had none of that intent, really, I don't think. Like,
yeah.
And it's one of those things, like, knowing the editorial part of the story behind the scenes gives you this kind of weird appreciation for how good these writers were kind of at rolling with the punches, like, we're just going to make this thing this, and lo and behold, they create one of the all-time great villains. And
very freewheeling.
Yeah, and now within this kind of era where I think artists, like, they see their time on a character as, like, their chance to make a stamp, there's less of that kind of, like, like rewriting of history to kind of come up with something really cool, being born out of it. So, I don't know. It's an interesting note that you saw there because, I don't think that was their intent at all. Their intent was to get rid of this thing, so they maybe added a bit of an evil bent to it. Right.
Because, I mean, the original, if I can tangent for like another minute here, the original premise for the costume, it was actually a fan solicitation. A fan sent in a letter saying, wouldn't it be cool if Spider-Man had a new costume? And the costume would make him jump like higher and make him move faster, and his webs were tougher or whatever. And Marvel's editor-in-chief Jim Shooter kind of basically bought the pitch and assigned DeFalco to work with this fan to make a tangible story out of it. And like DeFalco was like, after like struggling with this fan for a bit, was like, there's no there. You know what I mean? Like, what is this? So it kind of like then took, going back to the drawing board and getting Secret Wars, and then, Stern apparently on his way out the door, when knew that when this new costume was coming, he apparently said to DeFalco, but here's something to think about with the costume. And Dom was like, what? He's like, it's alive, like that, like. And that's where it kind of went from there. So it was very freewheeling and kind of like, what was originally supposed to be was miles away from what we ended up on, and you kind of have to appreciate the roundabout yet seemingly organic way that we landed there.
Well, very cool. Do you have any final thoughts or from this issue, or?
I mean, not particularly. I mean, I get what you're saying about, is it essential? Is it not? I mean, like, I don't know. For me, like, when I guess why I would go back again to essential is if you're talking about, trying to get fans into this character and into this universe. I mean, this is such a great self-contained story that you can just jump into and really without having a lot of prior information get what you need out of it. You know what I mean? Like, and to me, those are kind of like the comics when I'm thinking of essentials that I really kind of want to jump onto, So,
yeah.
And if you haven't read these issues, I mean, you can find them in so many reprints and Marvel Unlimited and everything like that. I mean, read this one, read the following 7-8 issues up to 258 when he gets rid of the costume. I mean, they're all great. And of course,
Lord knows we've talked about them.
Yeah, and of course you can read Marvel Secret Wars number 8 to see the actual mechanics behind how he got the costume. So there you go.
Cool. All right, well, let's move on to the Friendly Neighborhood Spider Talk Members Club.
It's the Friendly Neighborhood Spider Talk Members Club. It's the club with the incredibly long-winded name. Yeah, the Friendly Neighborhood Spider Talk Members Club. Time for new members to get 15 minutes of fame. And maybe even win a prize.
All right, Dan. Well, Friendly Neighborhood Spider Talk Members Club, my favorite thing in the world to say. We couldn't do it without your support, listeners, on our Patreon account, which, of course, you can access by going to superiorspidertalk.com and clicking on the Support Superior Spider Talk link. Last episode, Dan, we talked about a giveaway, a prize, Amazing Spider-Man number 250. What was the result of that raffle, Dan?
Yeah, we're giving it away to one of our Patreon supporters, and that Patreon supporter is none other than Nick Harrison. So, Nick, you are our lucky winner, and you're going to see that Amazing Spider-Man number 250 showing up in your mail. Next week, we'll be doing another one of these, so stay tuned, and you could win a prize if you sign up to be one of our members of our club. We're going to give away all kinds of awesome comics, so stay tuned, and Nick, check your mailbox for this awesome prize.
Excellent. Well, congratulations, Nick. All right, Dan. Well, maybe one thing we won't be giving away anymore are digital copies of comics. And maybe in the Spider News section we could explain why.
Yeah, let's do that.
Give me pictures of the Spider-Man. I need something that's front page news. I want to see him slinging those webs around. I want to make him look like a fool. We need to get this vigilante. Let's up the ante. Take off his mask. Give me some Spider News.
Mark, we like to talk about Spider News, and typically it's things we're excited about. I'm not so sure that's the case here. I don't know. I mean, this announcement's going to hit different audiences in different ways. So let's first talk about what happened, or what was announced just the other day in Marvel history. Mark, what is going on?
Yeah, well, what are you talking about? Some people may not be happy. I mean, I always love it when you get something for free for so long and then told you can't get it anymore.
Well, that's not entirely.
I know. I'm being glib. Okay. So, for a number of years, Marvel has been with its most of its books. I would say the vast majority at this point. Was giving away a free digital copy of the issue of the comic that you purchase. So, you buy a copy of Amazing Spider-Man, and in the back you get the little peel sticker and you get your digital copy of Amazing Spider-Man. What people did with those codes, I guess was kind of always up to the reader. I mean, Marvel never indicated you couldn't share or I mean, didn't they even post something where multiple, ways that multiple people can access the same code? I mean,
they never posted that, but people figured it out that you could basically share it with an unlimited number of people.
Okay, well, so we certainly liked using those codes. I mean, Dan likes, he certainly likes to grab images of the comics to put in our podcast feed. But even beyond that, I'm on the New York City subway. I don't necessarily like having hard copies on the subway with me. I like to, I buy my comics and then I download the codes and download them onto my iPad and read them that way. So I'm not jostling with hard paper and risking getting it bent or wet or whatever on the train. But as it works out, we're going to be Marvel. When is this effective? Is it a couple of months from now?
It's in February.
Okay, so next month is they're still going to give you a digital code at the end of the issue, but it will not be for a copy of the comic you had purchased. It will instead be kind of, I guess, a randomized classic issue. It'll be a first issue of a classic arc of a Marvel story. Obviously, with the intent of, hey, you read this one and maybe there's a trade paperback coming out in a couple of months or has just come out. You could buy the whole thing and read the whole run of comics. So, obviously this won't change the price point of hard copy Marvel Comics.
Well, that's the real question is, for so long they said that the additional dollar was justified by the digital code.
Right. But you're still getting additional content. It just won't be the content for that issue. I mean, I guess it's like, how much do you value the asset of what the code is? You know what I mean? Like, are you paying for a copy of that exact comic, or are you paying for additional? I mean, in some ways, you can spin this as you're getting more for your buck because you're getting the hard copy of the comic you just purchased, and you're getting 2 other comics.
Yeah, that's true. And I also want to be clear that it's not every comic. It's only like major flagship books like Avengers and Spider-Man. Like smaller titles are not getting the digital code.
Right.
And so I wonder if they'll reduce the prices on their books or keep them at $3.99. I think they're going to be hard-pressed to sell books without digital codes that aren't as popular for the same price model.
Yeah, I mean, this is and just to kind of explain, I mean, I don't know if an executive from Marvel has said this plainly yet, but I mean, I think the general impetus for why they're doing this is that they're losing out on potential digital sales on comics because it's kind of they're giving away the milk for free, so to speak. I mean, like it's, what. Why is someone going to, like, DC doesn't do any digital codes. And I guess, with DC, you have people who buy the hard copies and then you just have people who are just all digital. Whereas with Marvel, because of this model, I think there's a belief that, they have the print sales, but maybe they're missing out on digital sales because either people who would buy it digitally are also downloading their hard copies, or they're sharing the codes with other people who would just buy the digital. So, I mean, there's clearly a belief that that the company is losing money on this model. I don't think they'd be changing it if they were making money on the current model.
The way it's being spun, though, is that they're trying to save retailers by introducing you to new stories that they'll then go and buy at a retail shop. But for me, it's going to have the exact opposite effect. I'm probably going to end up buying all my ancillary stuff digitally, and if I were to be enticed by a new story, I don't know that I would go to a retailer and buy it. If I've already got the first issue digitally, I'd just buy the next 5 issues in the story and save myself $1 than going out and buying a hardcover of it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that's. I'm going to be curious to see what the actual result from this is, like what they get from it. Because I mean, like for me, it's like, I buy hard copies of. I'm not saying a limited number of books, but I mean, my pull list certainly isn't as large as a lot of other people who are big comic book people are. With that said, I only buy what I need to read immediately, and I've always appreciated the digital code option because, like, if I bought like a run of comics, maybe for the show, because we were going to talk about for the show, that in retrospect, it's like, I really don't need those in my collection. I would feel more justified in getting rid of those comics. Either by donating them or lending them or whatever, because I still had the digital codes as kind of a keepsake from it, like where I could go back to it. So now, like, my inclination is kind of like, maybe I need to rethink what I'm buying in print, and for everything else, as a subscriber to Marvel Unlimited, if there's no immediacy to it, I'll just wait the 6 months or whatever to read it on Marvel Unlimited.
And I think this whole, like, I love my retailers, but, like, I do think there has to be a reckoning at some point where it's like Marvel doesn't stand to make. They stand to make more money going completely digital. They don't have to print books. They don't have to ship things. They don't have to do any of that stuff. They can just have you buy their book digitally. And I think in the long run, it's smart for them to lower the costs on the digital book so that it becomes more like the spinner rack. People can pick something up without having to have the anxiety of spending $4 on it or $5 or whatever. You know, and the only way they do that is by lowering, their expenses on these books, and a lot of that is shipping and they're taking a bite doing that way. But if everybody that reads Marvel Comics bought stuff digitally, they could lower the price and experiment more. So, I mean, I think it's smart for them to support retailers and stuff, but I think they're probably having an internal conversation about like, do we really need to? Like, is it serving our business?
I mean, heck, Dan. I mean, I'll go one up on you and say not only is the future probably digital, I think the future is probably something, kind of akin to what they're already doing in Marvel Unlimited, but maybe slightly expanded. I mean, I don't know. Are you familiar with the Texture app, Dan?
Yeah.
Texture, for those who aren't, it's for magazines, and there's I would say about 100 or so magazines that it's a part of the subscription service. It's and it's all up to date, like as it's coming out stuff, and you pay a monthly fee, and you can download magazines offline, and you can access the archives back to a certain date. So it's kind of like a combination of both Netflix, but also like real live, up to date digital. It's not like you're not waiting X amount of months for something to kind of be processed through. Again, like kind of what you're doing with Marvel Unlimited, and you almost got to wonder, as more companies kind of follow that model, if it is indeed profitable. I mean, Texture's been around for a few years now. What's going to stop fans from just being like, wanting something, demanding something like that? Like, I don't necessarily want to just pay $2.99 for a book. I want to spend $15 a month and get as many books as I can. Like I feel like we're starting to move more and more into that direction in terms of how we consume media. It's not, nobody just does one thing anymore. Like there's no attention span for it. I mean, there's also the way comics are written and laid out, and in the amount of story you get. I just don't know if $3 even digitally is a justified price for a comic.
Yeah.
For the amount of entertainment you can get out of it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, trades are certainly a way to go, but like, new readers aren't necessarily buying single issues. Like, I don't know many people that I've turned on to comics that have gone from like, oh, comics are cool, let me start buying them every week. Like, and of course there is always growth in that realm. People love their single issues, but yeah, I mean, I think the only way that's going to work is if it's, if people can binge for $7 or $8 on Netflix for a month. I don't think people are going to want to get 2 comics for the equivalent price.
Right. I mean, do you want to rent a movie through iTunes for $4, or do you want to buy and watch it for 2.5 hours, or do you want to buy a comic through Comixology or Marvel.com and be done with it in 10 minutes?
Yeah. I don't know if it's, I mean, we obviously still pay all that money because we love the art form, but yeah, it becomes increasingly difficult to justify.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Again, I'm going to be really fascinated to see what the net result from this is. I mean, on one end, no, I don't want to wish. I like Marvel when I like Marvel products, so I guess I want them to succeed. But at the same token, I wouldn't be shocked if they didn't, and I hope that if this doesn't work out the way they want, that they don't start kind of attacking other things. Like, I mean, I guess where I'm talking about is like Marvel Unlimited. I mean, did they start stripping Marvel Unlimited of all the new stuff? You know, like oh, you know, now you got to wait a year and a half before you get a new issue. You know what I mean? Because it's like, you know, what's the people who are, you know, I've already seen people say with this announcement, like, oh, I'll just wait for the trade now. And it's like, well, you know, if you're going to wait for the trade, you might as well just subscribe to Marvel Unlimited and you can get all the trades.
Right.
You know?
For the
like,
same price.
Yeah.
For less.
Yeah, exactly. So,
I mean, this seems like kind of a small, you know, deal, but it I think it has bigger ramifications and is just another like big step, you know, forward for the industry figuring out what its future is.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll see. Is it a Brave New World or not, Dan?
I don't know. It might be Days of Future Past.
Hey. Watch out for the Sentinels. They'll take your comic book money. Why don't you bring us home on that dark note?
All right, that sounds fair. Of course, you can find all of our new amazing Spider Talk and old Superior Spider Talk podcasts over at superiorspidertalk.com. And you can find us on all the usual places like iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, and YouTube by searching for Amazing Spider Talk. And if you do, please leave us a rating. We haven't gotten one of those in a while because they're how we know that you're listening, that you care about us, and it's a great way to get new listeners to come on board. And lastly, if you have any opinions on the comic we discussed today, that's Amazing Spider-Man 252, or any other questions for us, be sure to email us at amazingspidertalk@gmail.com, or you can leave us a voicemail at 9RedGoblin. And if you are the Red Goblin, I got to hear about your quintessential quiche. You gotta tell us an update on that. And also, you can tweet at us at hashtag #OKToPrint, and we'll read the question you attach to that hashtag on the air as well. That's a lot of things you can do. We are all inclusive as a show. Mark?
Well, I got a few more things you can do, Dan.
Oh.
And that would include checking out our Facebook pages. You could also subscribe to our brother podcast, The Ultimate Spin. And you know why you should subscribe to that podcast, Dan?
Why?
Well, in addition to it being a really cool podcast, that's where you can get to keep up with adventures of Spider-Gwen and Miles Morales.
Which are, for the time being, one adventure.
Well, it's for the time being, but also we just don't talk about those characters anymore.
Yes, that's true. That is true. Also, don't forget to check out our friendly neighborhood Spider Talk Members Club, because that's how we keep this show going. We get all this new awesome music that we've been giving you over the past couple weeks, and how we give you all those awesome prizes, like today's copy of Amazing Spider-Man number 250. Mark, on next week's show, we're going to be talking about The Clone Conspiracy number 4. So we hope you'll join us, and by you'll join us, I mean Mark. Are you going to be there?
I guess so, Dan.
All right.
With bells on?
That would be really disturbing to our audio recording.
Bing. All right, Dan. Well, where can I find you with virtual bells on?
Oh, yes. You can follow me on Twitter at SupSpiderTalk and read everything that I write and edit and all that stuff over at SuperiorSpiderTalk.com. How about you, Mark?
Yes, well, you too can find me at SuperiorSpiderTalk.com. Where I'll probably be talking about Clone Conspiracy number 4 and maybe some other things. You can find me on Twitter at ChasingASMblog. And be on the lookout. Go pre-order my book, 100 Things Spider-Man fans should know or do before they die. You can find it on Amazon, I think Barnes & Noble. You can find it on the publisher's website, which is Triumph Books. Pre-order it and support me when that book comes out in the summer. And by supporting me, I also mean supporting our show.
Awesome. Well, Mark, I know that your Uncle Ben has died a few times in his life, or whatever that means. But was there ever a time where he straight up disappeared for a while?
Oh God, yeah, I know what you're talking about. You're talking about his disappearance to the world of the Beyonder, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I was hinting at it, but you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, well, it's funny. Like I always was kind of like to Uncle Ben, what was up with that, man? And he was like, well, here's the deal. My boss at the Mob Ties factory, he wanted action figures. He wanted us all to be action figures. He sent us all to the battle world so that we could, basically, and by all of us, he means like, other guys at the factory, some of the mobsters that we made the ties for.
What a hodgepodge of people.
The monkeys that threw pies and then ate my face. All of them on this one planet. We did battle, and then while we were doing battle, I don't know, some like greater cosmic entity made action figures of us all. So I was like, oh wow, that's really awesome. And
Uncle Ben, the action figure. What was it? Did he have like karate chop action?
Well, no. He just came with like a shield that had like a reflector, like a what do you call those things? Like a hologram kind of a thing on it.
All right.
Like the Secret Wars figures, Dan. Come on.
All right.
So he has his shield and everything, which is just awesome. But so he shows me the figure, and I'm like really like blown away by this. But I was kind of I was a kid at this point. I was being a little bit of a jerk, and at one point I was outside playing with with my Uncle Ben and my Kang and my Doctor Doom and my flesh-eating monkey, and I took a magnifying glass and took the sun. And I started melting the plastic of Uncle Ben.
Oh no!
And Dan, I don't know what was going on, but there must have been like some kind of like cosmic connection between the action figure and my actual Uncle Ben. Oh. Because as I'm like burning a hole through his head, like through the plastic of his head, I hear him screaming from inside the house, and I ran into the house, and like he's got this hole melting in the top of his head, saying, "I don't know what happened." I'm like, "Uncle Ben, it's my fault. I could have stopped it." And he said, "Why have I always told you, with great podcasts must also come amazing spider talk?"
Don't miss the next